Morning, making bread. Alright, so I already added my water and I'm using my scale to measure. And now I'm going to add my, you can see it's more than, well, it kind of doubled, but I slept in. So pouring in, and I'll know it's still good because it'll float.
Hey Wesley, come here, there's something on your roster.
He's just laying down.
No, it's in the head.
So my recipe, this recipe calls for 200 grams. I went a little bit over, it's 203. But I'll show you what it looks like when it floats. So. Okay. Now I'm gonna get my whisk. You can use a wooden spoon, you can really use anything. Just stir it around until it's milky. So, milky. And I'm gonna add my flour. This recipe calls for 950 grams of flour. I am and it has 3 different types of flour. I found that I can play around with the white flours as much as I want. So I'm going to reset my measurement so I'm back to 0, and then I just kind of add my flours in as I want. I found that if I can add like a lot of bread flour, I can add a lot of all-purpose flour. I cannot add a lot of wheat flour or it kind of changes. So for me personally, I found that less than around 1 scoop, or if you really want to push it, less than 2 scoops of wheat flour. My recipe only calls for 100 grams, but I like to push it so I can get a little more whole grain in. So I'm just gonna kind of, this is bread flour. I'm almost out, so I'm gonna add what I have left. Time to order more. And then I'm gonna finish it out with unbleached all-purpose. King Arthur, in my opinion, is probably the best that you can find at the grocery store. If you want to save some money, Costco sells their Kirkland brand unbleached organic, and it's equivalent, if not better, in my opinion. And it's like $18.99 for 20 pounds, whereas I think King Arthur is a 20-pound bag for like $6 or $7. Okay, so we've got our flour. So now we're gonna mix. This latest thing of bread flour that I've been using, I actually got at Sam's. It's like a huge 20-pound bag. They sent it in the mail, and I just divvied it up into freezer bags and put it in the freezer and used it 1 bag at a time. Okay, so I'm about done, and I'll show you what it looks like. It looks like a shaggy kind of mess. Word to the wise, if you have a septic tank, try to put the least amount of this down your drain as you can, because I keep reading comments from people who are having it clog their drains. Okay, so as you can see, it's this shaggy kind of mess. We're gonna let it set for, I think it's 20 minutes, might be 30. I'm gonna check the recipe after. And then we add our salt and kind of mush it in as lightly as we can and let it sit again. Okay, so the dough has rested for 20 minutes otherwise, so still looks a little clumpy. We're going to sprinkle the salt, and then it's really like personal preference as to how you work it in. But here we go. I'm gonna do a couple stretch and folds. That's just me. Some people like to add reserve and then add a little bit of water with the salt at this point to kind of help it work in. I've done that, I've done this. And honestly, I don't have a favorite. I just, whatever I feel like. I had mentioned not adding more than so much wheat in the last time, and then I started thinking, I do have a recipe that uses like 50% wheat, 50% white. It uses a different amount of water, and it's pretty good. So if you wanted to do like a whole wheat loaf, just, this is what my family likes. Okay, so we've got the salt work done. We're going to let it sit for another 30 minutes, and then we come back and start our stretch and folds. So while this is for autolyzing, also I wanted to talk about, this is a shower cap. What are they, like a couple, like $1 or $2 for like a 3-pack? Anyways, they work great. I'm gonna show you how I get my starter back in the fridge, like how I keep it until the next time I bake. So I get half a cup of flour and half a cup of water. Make sure there's no salt in the water. Okay. And this is just my cheap stir sticks. So measure out about half a cup of water, or half a cup of flour. I pour it in. You want to try and keep the jar inside like as sanitary as possible. So just be careful not to use like dirty spoons or anything that might contaminate your starter, because you can get mold and other stuff that grow in there, and then you're gonna have to toss your starter and start from new. And then I've got about half a cup. I'm gonna use a little bit less and stir it and see what it looks like. You want it to kind of come to the consistency of like thick pancake batter. Doesn't have to be like perfect. You'll trial and error get there. Once it gets in the fridge, obviously it's gonna thicken up, but then I just use my chopsticks. Stir it as best I can, try and scrape the edges. And then I'll show you what it looks like. And then I'm gonna put my lid on and then put this in the fridge. And that flour is going to basically feed the microorganisms in there. But because you're putting it in the fridge, you're slowing them down. So if you were to keep it on the counter, you're gonna have to, like, you would pull half of it out, put it into a jar, and that would be your discard is what they call it. Because every time you feed, your microorganisms are multiplying. And so obviously the more little critters you have in here, the more you have to feed them. You don't want to have like this giant thing of sourdough starters. So you're going to be reducing your population every time you feed, unless obviously you're reducing your population when you're baking. So that's why I didn't pull any out and discard. But if I, for instance, didn't bake next week, I would pull this out. I would reduce my population by putting some of this into a discard jar and then feed it. Hope I explained that okay. So All right, now I'm gonna put this in the fridge and it's gonna be happy in there until I pull it out to bake next week. So about the discard, here is my discard jar. Because I bake once a week, I don't get a whole lot of discard, but save it, don't throw it out, because all it basically is unfed starter, and there's a lot of really yummy recipes that you can use it in, and then ferment. For instance, my family loves sourdough chocolate chip cookies. I just made these for a party yesterday, and they won't last long in our house because the boys devour them. They're really yummy, and you ferment them in the fridge before you bake them, which gives like a little bit of a tang, but then also it's supposed to help break down that gluten. So anyways, save your discard. You can use it for a lot of stuff. There's tons of discard recipes. Just Google discard recipes. All right, we're gonna leave this to sit for that 30 minutes and then we'll be back to do stretch and folds. Okay, so it's been 30 minutes. So now we're gonna start our stretch and folds. You can see what the dough looks like. And actually, I'm gonna kind of flip around here. See if I can do this one-handed and show you what a stretch and fold looks like. So you're basically just going to one side of the dough, pulling up and tucking over, and then turning quarter turn and doing the same. So sorry about where the camera's at. And you go around, I go around once. So that would be 4 stretch and folds, turning, quarter turn every time. It's kind of entertaining watching me try to do this with one hand. Okay, so that would be 1 turn of stretch and folds, and then you would let it sit. My recipe tells me to let it sit for 15 minutes. It says to do 3 stretch and folds for 15 minutes apart, and then I'm supposed to do 3 more 30 minutes apart. I'm gonna be honest, I'm not perfect at this. The last loaf I made, I actually ended up waiting longer the first couple stretch and folds because I was just distracted, and then I think I only did like 2 30-minute stretch and folds. So it's really just a matter of getting in as many as you can in that 2 hours. Ideally, that second half, you kind of just stretch it out. Or I would say just see what your recipe says and go by that, and then you can start playing around. That loaf I made where I didn't do as many stretch and folds and it ended up sitting longer, I feel like it actually tasted better, but to each his own. I mean, a good loaf is a good loaf. So we're gonna leave this for 15 minutes. I'm gonna come back, I'm gonna do 2 more stretch and folds 15 minutes apart, and then I'm gonna do 3 stretch and folds 30 minutes apart, and then we will come back and I'll show you what it looks like for me just to let it do its bulk ferment. Okay? So you can see it's already started to fluff a little compared to what it was before. It looks a little bit like the bubbles and stuff. It starts to develop during that stretch and fold. And so I will put a lid on it. Normally when I put my dough in here, it's at about the 2-liter mark or 2-quart mark. I'm just estimating what level would be around there. So this is where it started, and I'm gonna mark it for myself, and that means that when my dough gets up here closer to the lid, that it's time for me to go ahead and move on to the next step. So this is where it just sits on the counter. Some people will choose to put it in the fridge, like if they know that they have to go run errands and they're not gonna be back in time. They'll leave it on the counter as long as they can, and then they'll put it in the fridge to continue to ferment. It slows it down. It slows the process down. I would suggest leaving it on the counter to start. And then once you get to know your dough and your recipe a little better, you can play around and decide. So we're gonna leave it here for several hours. I actually have to go clean a house, so I'm not gonna be checking this for about 4 hours. I'll be home and it'll probably be to the top, or hopefully not busting through the top. So, okay. All right, so it's been more than 4 hours and it's way up to the top. It actually had overdone it. My fault, I started talking where I was. So now we pour it out and we laminate our dough. So let me show you how that happens. You can see that it's doubled to twice its size. I usually put a little bit of flour on the table, which I did not do a good job of doing. You're gonna learn a lot about what not to do here. And then if you have a dough scraper, those work nice. They make them plastic, metal. If you're somebody who has done barbecue before, it also looks a little bit like what they chop barbecue with. Okay, so we pull it out. Let me see if you can see this well. And my recipe makes 2 full-size loaves. So whatever your recipe is might look a little bit different in size. I'll usually just, let me see, there. So you can see it's nice and bubbly. Hopefully I didn't over ferment it. And I'm just gonna cut it in half into like 2 as equal as I can, but it doesn't have to be perfect. Okay, this one I'm gonna set over here. And now we're gonna laminate. So laminating is basically, I'm just going to test the flexibility of the loaf. And try my best to kind of spread it out. Okay, if you were gonna do any type of inclusions in your dough, like cheese, herbs, I've heard some people like blueberry or lemon zest, or I like to do like Italian cheese, some shredded Italian cheeses, like grated with Italian seasoning. Like this would be when you would do it, and you would just kind of cover it all over and then wrap it back up. So what we do from here is purely opinion. I like to fold mine kind of like a letter.
Oh my gosh, I get stuck.
And then roll.
I get stuck on the spring.
And then what we're gonna do is work to create tension with the dough. So I push it forward, turn it a quarter of a turn, tuck and pull it back to me, push it up, quarter of a turn, tuck and pull it back to me, push it up, quarter of a turn, tuck, pull it back to me, and so on and so forth. And so you see we've created like this nice little ball. We've got some tension built. And then I'm gonna set it to the side, and it's gonna rest for 15 minutes. Now we're gonna do the same thing with our second loaf. We're gonna laminate. Some people don't even do this. I've seen on YouTube. Honestly, like I said, perfect your loaf the way that your recipe shows, and then branch out from there once you get comfortable with it. Okay, we'll fold. Some people will even, like especially if they do inclusions, they'll roll it up like this and then roll it up like that. They're really, I don't know. I don't think there's any perfect way to do it. You'll notice there's a little bit of tackiness. The higher the hydration in your dough, the tackier it's gonna be. And mine, I would say the hydration is around 80%. The original recipe called for less water, and then slowly over time I started adding more water, and I just kind of like the way that the bread finishes with that extra water. So that's the way we do it now. It just gets a little harder to work with the dough, the wetter it is. Okay, so not perfect, but there's our little ball of tension. I'm gonna set it over. I'm gonna cover these with tea towels and let them sit for 15 minutes. And then come back and I'll put them in the baskets in the fridge to cold ferment. All right, I'll be back. Okay, so now that our loaves have rested, we're gonna pull them out one at a time. they're not gonna laminate like before, so I usually just kind of pull and tuck to make a loaf. And I do that kind of shape and turn again. And then I have a Banneton basket lined with just some old dish towel, and it's sprinkled with rice flour. And that's what I put it in. Try my best to kind of get it to seal. And it's gonna go in the fridge and bulk ferment for, well, you can choose to let it sit here for an hour and then bake it. Most people put it in the fridge overnight and then bake the next day. But here's another basket. It's sprinkled with rice flour. Why rice flour? Well, because it's a non-gluten flour, it's supposed to be better to keep. Let's experiment here. Let's see what it's like if I don't fold it up, but just take the loaf as is. Yeah, so it's a non-gluten flour, so it doesn't stick and it doesn't dry out your loaf while it's cold fermenting. So I'm gonna put that in here. I'm gonna just kind of pinch the ends, make sure the seams, if there are any, are closed. Take my cheap shower curtains, cover them up, and then I'm gonna put them in the fridge. Like I said, if you wanted to bake, leave one out for about an hour to let it continue to ferment a little bit more, and you can bake it. Or, but I just think I prefer it to be in the fridge for about 12 hours. It breaks down the gluten further. So, okay. So next thing is baking. I will see you then. Hey, okay, it's been less than 24 hours, but here's my loaf, one of my loaves. It's been cold fermenting in the fridge, which basically just means I put the lid on it and stuffed it in the fridge. I have some parchment paper here. I have a little razor blade. I can't remember what they call it, but it comes with like a handle and it hooks, and honestly I think the handle sucks, so I just use my fingers. You can use a knife, you can use whatever, but we're going to take our loaf and flip it onto our parchment paper. Let me see if I can get the camera a little bit better of an angle. Sorry. Okay. Take my liner. I always use these flour sack. So score it however you want. Some people like to do all kinds of pretty stuff. The big thing is you just want to do like one big score so it can actually breathe. Otherwise it's going to find a place to crack and it's going to make a big space anyways. So I don't know. We'll do something here. And then here's going to be my big score along the side. Okay. Now, oh, there's Leslie. Say hi.
Hi. You're gonna have to make smiley faces and stuff and hearts for Valentine's Day.
All right. So I have had my my Dutch oven has been in the oven. I put it in the hot oven at because 25 degrees hotter than what my my recipe calls for. It's been in there for about an hour, so it gets nice and hot. I'm going to place my loaf and my parchment in the Dutch oven. Put the lid on, so I will hopefully not burn myself, because I have to forget to put the oven lid on. I didn't just say that out loud. Okay, and now I'm gonna put the pizza stone and the Dutch oven in together, and I'll tell you why. Alright, needed full concentration for that. Alright, now I'm going to set my temp for 25 degrees cooler. and set my timer. And my bake time goes for about half covered, half uncovered. And okay, back to the pizza stone. So the reason I do that is because I was having issues with the bottom of my loaf like burning or being really, really tough and hard, and it wasn't palatable. So I tried a couple different things, and this came out to be the simplest for me. I've seen all kinds of other ideas like sprinkling cornmeal on the top, on the bottom, people using trivets on the bottom of their Dutch oven, all kinds of things. So I would say play around and find what works best for you. That just happens to be what works best for me. So we're gonna bake it for 25 minutes covered, and then I'm going to take the lid off, and because I'm a little OCD about when my bread is done and I tend to be distracted and not pay attention, I have a meat thermometer that I'm going to put into my loaf for the second half of the baking, because the bread's done when it's between 200 and 210 degrees. That way it'll just beep and it'll be blonde proof and I know when it's done. So, okay. Okay, so I just took our loaf out of the oven. Here it is. You can see where that score I did made a nice little ear. It's hot. Hold on. Anyways, and the blisters, I ended up doing it, like I said, it was 25 minutes covered, and then you can see the bottom. So they recommend that you wait at least an hour for it to cool before you slice it. I know it's hard to resist, and who doesn't love warm bread fresh out of the oven? So I'm really debating here between whether I'm gonna, Wesley, should I slice it hot or should I not slice it hot?
Slice it.
Wesley says slice it hot. So we're gonna do all the things we're not supposed to do, and I'm gonna go ahead and slice it real quick, and we can look at the inside and you can see what you're not supposed to do. But again, who can resist hot bread with butter? Let me get a cutting board, and you can see all my junky snacks over here. Okay. So I'm gonna slice it across here. Ooh, hot. I think the reason is because you're supposed to make it look oh so pretty. So here's our loaf. You see the steam. I'm gonna regret this later because I'm sure it won't be quite as fluffy, but here's our bread, and we're gonna go have a slice with some butter. So happy baking, good luck. Remember, there's a learning curve, and once you get it done, it's amazing. So, bye.